I'm Laura Mae Martin, Executive Productivity Advisor at Google and author of UPTIME, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and this time around, I am joined by Laura Mae Martin, the Executive Productivity Advisor at Google and author of the book UPTIME, A Practical Guide to Personal Productivity and Wellbeing. She coaches Google's top executives on the best ways to manage their time and energy and sends out a weekly productivity newsletter that reaches over 50,000 employees. During her 13-year tenure at Google, Laura has worked in sales, product operations, event planning, and now executive coaching, so she knows the ins and outs of the place, which helps her, handle offering productivity advice to those that are working inside of Google, but also a lot of those things can be applied outside of Google, and we get into that during our conversation as well. We get into a lot of great things. We talk about downtime. We talk about a variety of it's two productivity people getting together, having a productive conversation. What's not to love about that? So let's get into it. Here is my productive conversation, a productive conversation with Laura Mae Martin. Laura, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate it. This is a conversation I've wanted to have for a while.
Yeah, so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So right out of the gate, as I'm looking at this book, Uptime, A Practical Guide to Personal Productivity and Wellbeing, everyone asks me this question all the time as a productivity expert. And after going through the book, I have a sense of it, but I'd like for people who aren't familiar with you to share your origin story of what got you so fascinated with productivity, because we are a rare and rather weird breed, I think.
Yes, I agree. A special kind. A lot of people ask me, did you spend all this time studying or looking up things about productivity? But as my sister will tell you, I've always been this annoying, quote
Mm.
unquote, whether it's, how we're baking cookies together. And I'm like, don't frost, then sprinkle. It's faster if we just frost them all and then sprinkle them all. That's just always the way my brain has worked. And so it started when I was in a completely different role at Google doing sales and started organizing my own inbox and time that way. And people were just leaning over to my desk. Hey, can you teach me how to do that? And that's what led me to develop this program and this role at Google.
So one of the first things that I noticed when I was going through the book was what your definition of productivity was, because nothing drives me nuts more than when people go with the rote definition of something, right? So someone would say productivity is about being more efficient and effective. I'm like, those are byproducts. Like, that's not what productivity
Mhm.
is about. And you mentioned that. I mean, I've said that productivity is the active link between intention and attention. You can have all the intention in
Mhm.
the world, but if you don't give it the attention, nothing's going to happen. Conversely, if you give attention to the wrong things without having any intention to, then where the heck did you end up? You mentioned out of the gate, you throw action into the mix here. So for
Mhm.
those that are listening to this episode or perhaps even watching the video, first off, share your definition, and then how hard has it been for people to kind of see that as really what it is, as opposed to kind of this idea of productivity is the power to produce, comma, especially in abundance, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. I like the intention attention. That's a good one too. I think that, as you saw, if you read the book, the right out of the gate, I talk about my most productive day ever. And then I go on to say that I binge watch TV the whole day. And of course, people are thinking, you're supposed to be a productivity expert. How is that a good day? And, it's down to the fact that if I set the intention of relaxing and finishing a show, I set aside the right time to do it and did it well. That's that action piece.
Hmm.
And I completed it and enjoyed it, then wasn't that a productive day? And so I think of it really holistically and, am I operating at my best in all these places and what I want to do and when I want to do it and how I do it versus just how much am I churning out?
Right. Yeah, yeah. Checking off boxes just for the sake of
Mhm.
checking off boxes. You talk about the five C's of productivity. And
Mhm.
I think it's important to note, and again, this kind of goes hand in hand with your journey, that there are there are lots. I mean, we look back at David Allen's stuff, which I'll link to his. We have episodes with him in the show notes, of course. Cal Newport, like everyone, kind of has a framing of how they look at productivity, and none is necessarily none are absolutely right or absolutely wrong. It's subjective. There's nuance, which we're going to get to nuance in a little bit here. But the 5 C's of productivity, I think what you've done here with this is you've kind of remove the churn to a degree. If what I mean by that is when well, first off, share those 5 C's, and then we'll get into why I think it has an impact against this idea of just churning and cranking.
Yeah, so the 5 C's is right in the intro chapter and kind of sets up the rest of the book, but the first one being that you create. So you come up with those ideas, you have that thought, that loop, I need to do this, I should do this, I need to buy this. And then the next C is how to actually capture that. So I'm on a run, I think I need to get that birthday gift for this weekend. How do I get that into my system? And then which moves into the next C, which is consolidate. So I have all these random thoughts, ideas, things I need to do. I've captured them, but now I need to put them into a way that actually allows me to schedule them and know when I'm going to do them. And that leads to close. So that's when I actually take those open ideas. I need to buy a birthday gift. I actually purchase them. But I think the one that's quote different than the other things I've read is that idea of calm, because that is really where the creation pops back up. And so that's, the book's called Uptime, but I talk a lot about downtime and how, making time for that run or that time when your brain is resting is actually the time when that next idea pops up, that next creative idea that you then cycle back into the C's.
And that's where the churn part gets kind of affected,
Mhm,
right? Because
mhm,
there's this reflection piece, there's this recharging piece, and to your point, you can't have uptime without downtime. Like,
mhm.
it's in
Exactly.
its very nature. You can't really.
Mhm,
One of the things that I found interesting is because the book is divided up into, which again is kind of the crux of it: what to do, when to do it, where to do it, how to do it well, which I think is, and then how to live well while doing it all, which will be a very interesting once we get to that point, chatting about
mhm,
that. But um, back to the nuance piece, and I think that this is where, I mean, again, you talk about your framing, and there's this little piece that you saw that, hey, this is something that is missing, and I'm going to add this to the mix. The idea of calm. When you talk about urgency and this idea of, and this comes up pretty early on in the book as well, setting an urgent time block every day. Now,
mhm,
a lot of people, when they are faced with urgency, they react instead of respond,
mhm,
right? And what I found interesting, and I'll kind of go over it a little bit here, is again, and you're relating this back to Google, which is really important because I think for a lot of people, they'll be like, well, that's all fine and dandy when you're working on your own. You're working in a large organization. In fact, an
mhm.
organization that owns the very platform that we are streaming this on right now, right? So there's a lot of moving parts. And I've done some work for Google in the past, and you kind of see behind the curtains, and there's a lot more going on there than you think, and a lot of assumptions made that really shouldn't be made. But when Thomas Curry, I hope I'm pronouncing this right,
Mhm,
Kurian, right?
mhm.
He sets an hour each day for urgent matters. You bring this up early on. A lot of people, I would think, would struggle with that nuanced approach because they're thinking, I got to deal with this urgent now, urgent now, urgent now, urgent now. But this urgency hour seems like a solid trick. So can you share a bit more about that and some of the benefits of doing that as opposed to just dealing with the urgent right away as it pops up?
Yeah, I think just knowing, first of all, that your job requires urgent. And so I always talk about the ER doctor, that's 100% urgent, but she's not also scheduling well patients throughout the day and then saying, gosh, I got to schedule all these appointments because this person came in. And so you have to view your role as urgent as it needs to be. And so in this situation, the executive picked a time that was both East Coast and West Coast friendly because that's where most of his team had split, and said, if something comes up in the morning, typically I can deal with it or schedule to deal with it at this block. And what it does by being consistent is I've heard people on his team say, okay, this came up. We know he's going to meet with us at 1.
Uh-huh.
We let's go ahead and clear our schedules. Let's have a brief to his team by 12:30. It operationalize urgent, it systematizes it. And so just like when you're very overwhelmed, naming your feeling can help sort through that. When urgent just feels like urgent
Yeah.
emergency, actually having some systems around it, including an hour to deal with it each day, can be helpful.
Well, it gets you back to the state of reason, right? Like this ability
Mhm,
to reason, which we lose it when we're frenetic. Like there's no way
mhm.
to be reasoned with your approaches if you are if you feel like it's why I don't like the term. I don't know how you feel about this. I'd like to what do you think about the term when people say, "Oh, I've got to fight a lot of fires today. I got so many fires to fight." What when someone says that to you, what do you what like I can sense already. Do you get like does your back go up a little bit to things like what does that
I'm
feel like?
sweating now. Um, no, as you know, from the alternate title option for the book was busy is not as important, and
Yeah.
I go into that language. I'm back to back. I have so many emails, fire drills, put all these things. I don't say any of that. I say awkward things like, "Oh, I'm not busy. I'm balanced," or "I'm perfect amount of committed,"
Yep.
or "I'm focused on the right things at the right time." And that makes people feel weird because nobody talks like that. They like to use phrases like you mentioned.
Well, and the thing is that those cliches, those things that are aren't necessarily true. Firefighters fight things strategically. Like when people say I'm fighting fires, it's like, oh, so you're going to let that burn? What? No, 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 no. Well, that's what a firefighter would do in certain situations. They'll let a building burn down to save some. So don't use that. You're using. Frankly, I think firefighters might be a little disrespected by the think that thought that you're willy
Right.
nilly going in there to. Um, Another thing that I found I loved this because I've again, there's nuance to it. And this idea of the list funnel that you talk about,
Mhm,
because there is this propensity for people to and I actually saw Tiago Forte tweet about this not too long ago. But the idea of optimization instead of productivity. So people are spending so much time
mhm,
tinkering, I think all of us have addressed this at one point in time or another, like busy work looking like work, or as I say, doing productive instead of actually being productive. The list funnel to some might feel like it's a doing, like a doing productive activity, but the way you approach it in the book, it it's not the friction is lower. So can we talk about like the friction of building the funnel is low. And once you've got it, I think so can we dive into that a little bit because I know that there's a lot of people first off thinking,
mhm.
but wait, I have this list and I mean we hear, David Allen has lists upon lists upon lists upon lists
Mhm.
and people are like, "Oh, but there's this master list." I'm like, "There's so much more to it than that." So let's get into this list funnel thing because I think a lot of people listening or even watching right now can benefit from this concept.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite part of the book because it was one of those things that I wanted to give an exact recipe, something you can start doing tomorrow, not just keep lists, think about your weekly. No, this is what to do Sunday, this is what to do Monday, for how long. And so the idea of the list funnel mostly came from that's what I've been doing for 20 years, but also I watch and coach people and witnessed their list system and just found it lacking in so many ways. Oh, you have those things here. When do you plan to do them? Oh, I actually don't know. I just wrote them. Oh, this thing you have here, that's something you wanted to do in the fall. Why is that on your list for today? And so just this total chaotic system, and I wanted to say here is a way of doing it where that follows those 5 C's. So you have that idea, you have somewhere to put it. You put them all together, you have somewhere for deadline. So starting with more of a dashboard style list of everything possible that you could do that you need to do in every single area of your life, grouped by type of action. And the reason that that's important is because I sit at my computer and I think, okay, I'm doing some personal computer stuff on Sunday night. I have everything listed that I need to do on the computer for my personal life. So buying tickets, et cetera, et cetera. Then I get to a doctor's appointment early. I have 20 minutes. I have a list of every call I need to make, right there organized versus like a work call, a personal call. No, it's calls.
Yeah.
And so from that list, you continue to build and say, okay, now I'm looking actually at my week and being realistic. Am I traveling? Probably not going to pull that many things off of this, but oh, I actually have a lot of good blocks for work. What can I knock out on my weekly list all the way down to what am I doing tomorrow? When am I doing these things from my list and what time are they getting scheduled? And so it really just gives you that exact way of making sure you don't drop the ball on something, because if it's not off my daily list, it's still on the weekly list. It gives
Mhm.
you that reassurance, but it's that ironclad system of moving items through that create, consolidate, close part of the C's.
And what I like about it too is that, and again, I'll give props to David Allen for this contextualization aspect of lists that has happened. It's for some people, it's that was hard for them to grasp the idea of
Mhm.
using contextual elements. I mean, even when I was talking about time crafting and first putting it together as the Now Your method, then time crafting, it was very much we talked about mode based work, which is essentially an evolved version of context. But then the work part got in there. And I'm like, but not everything feels like so. You have to find a way to crack the nut. And so I call them attention paths, which is essentially a filtration device. And what I like about the list funnel is that I think, and I mean, this is where I think personal and business can intersect. That's
Mhm.
something that businesses can get behind more than attention paths in terms of just the verbiage used. The words matter. How challenging, or even let's go with two possible ways, like the challenges and maybe even the surprises. When you started to take on this role at Google and really dive into it, like, again, even when business isn't always personal, productivity is. So
Mhm.
how did you navigate this? Because again, people love their acronyms, and I mean, I do too. I mean, it makes it easier for communication to take place, but how do you balance this objectivity around, here are the initiatives that we're putting forward, here are the projects that we're working on, either individually or collaboratively, but also you can work here. Oh, this is how you work. And we're going to get to the
Mhm.
whens too. Oh, you're more of a night owl. Okay, well, we keep that in mind. Oh, you'd like to use this tool, and tools are going to be something we'll touch on as well. Like, how did you navigate that? Like, what challenges did you face, and was it easier than you thought it would be? Was it more challenging? I mean, because that to me, getting into that's where I'm like, I could feel that you might face the most resistance.
I think there are some things that are quote universal, like good meetings.
Mm,
So there's a lot of things that you can list as good habits in meetings. Of course, there's difference for one-on-ones versus an all-team meeting or something like that, but there are some standards you can use when talking about meetings. Similar to email, there's not every, a salesperson is going to look different than an engineer, is going to look different than an executive, but every person within their email has things they need to respond to, things they need to read, and things they need to follow up on later. And so some of those core principles are similar and easy to train at a scalable level. But then to your point, productivity is so personal because, especially the when and the where, which I think you mentioned, but I am a morning person who works better and focuses on my days at home. Alternatively, my husband is a night owl who has to be in the office to get anything done. So, how could I train those two people on the same thing? And that's where it goes more into learning your patterns. So, my coaching obviously takes the approach of let's talk about when you get things best done, what's working for you. So, building on those things. But then, when it comes to teaching that scalably, it's getting people to recognize their own patterns, which I think sometimes is hard. People are like, wow, this book is a little bit self reflective. And that's kind of the point, because I can't tell you what to do. You know best
yeah.
about yourself.
Well, not only recognizing the patterns, but being okay with them. I think that's, and being
Mhm.
and having the permission. I mean, when you're going through, and as we get to the when chapters and we dive into the when area, I'm a night owl. So I am that in that, 20 to 25, like 20% of people who face this, you got to be into the office at 9. I'm like, okay. And then we struggle with those, 9 a.m. meetings. But that said, and I mean, I know you've done the work around, energy, and I mean, we've had Dr. Michael Bruce on the show before, and this idea of circadian rhythms and listening to your body clock. Dan Pink wrote When. I mean, there's lots of stuff around that. But what's interesting is that there's still this stigma attached to night owls, and yet
Mhm.
and early risers also are going to face problems, and same with diurnal people with those 9 a.m. meetings, because you're
Mhm.
hitting the early risers just at the tail end. You're hitting the
Yeah, you're
no one is
crashing by 9 a.m.
no one is like no one like honestly those status meetings should be how you feeling tired. Okay,
Yeah,
fine. Like, can we get out of here and get back to the thing? So
that's true.
but yeah, I really the where matters too in that so you talked about
Mhm.
the, like, do you feel that the when and the where are connected in a really non-obvious way, like the like those
Hmm.
like are because for me when matters so much more than where, but that's the
Mhm.
state that I mean I'm in my study right now, I'm self-employed, I can the where is I mean I can go to the coffee shop and get work done, right? I could I mean but it's the time, like I suck
Mhm.
before noon, period, right?
Even I
And
suck afternoon.
right. So you and I, but doing this right now is actually so what I can do, and we're by the way, we're recording this at like 10 a.m. because you're on the West Coast too, right? So
I'm on East
oh, you're
Coast, so
east. So I'm catching you just as you're starting to dip, and you're catching me before I'm really ready. So
we're
so
here.
so yeah, we're and that's the reality of it. Like with distributed work, that's got to be a
Mhm.
distributed workforce. That's got to be a challenge that you're facing with with Google on a regular basis, I would imagine, right? Like how do you
Well,
manage
then
that
you add
dynamic?
then you add global teams,
Right.
where it's like now you're in Asia and it's morning your time. And so, yeah, I think the one thing Google does really well is, in lots of companies, is looking at that. And this is what I encourage of all managers when I talk to them on podcasts or whatever, is think. And instead of thinking, oh, is my employee, signed on this exact time, or how many calls did they make this morning, thinking about, these are our monthly goals, these are our quarterly goals, and I'm going to give my employee the freedom to achieve those in a way that works for them, with flexibility and the ability to work at their best. Of course, you can't tell your manager, I'm low energy, so I'm not going to your 9 a.m. meeting. So I
Right.
talk about that in the book, how to work with other people but still capitalize on your rhythms. But I think that that's an important part of realizing how you can make people their most productive, is giving them that freedom to figure it out. And one good thing about the pandemic is, I do think it stripped away a lot of these commutes, office specific times. People were all of a sudden like, wow, I'm a morning person. I work with a writer at Google. He wakes up every day at 5, writes until like 9, takes a break to eat breakfast and work out, then kind of like goes into the office around 10:30 and does some other things. So, having that, he does his best writing at 5 a.m. So
Yeah.
who's to say, no, you need to do that run at 5 a.m. because we want you writing at 10? That's not going to be his best work. And so that's what the pandemic did a little bit, is allowed people to play around with those rhythms and recognize them for
It
themselves.
it accelerated what was already on the way anyway too. So it
Mhm.
actually and I think that's the part we're facing right now is the fact that it had to happen so quickly that we're in that adjustment phase. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of
Yeah.
things that people aren't taking into account when they think about this. I mean, we have been so trained in knowledge work specifically that we can see what's happening. If you're present, then you must be productive. Like which is a total terrible narrative because you've got people, and I mean, we all know the people that can get the work done in 4 hours, but they're there for 8, right? Like
Mhm.
we've seen that, or 6 and can get done 8. But we also see the people, and again, back to the whole night owl, early riser. Like I did a talk early 2023 where I like kind of said, "Hey, I'm a night owl, and here's are some of the tactics you can try." And you've shared obviously the power hour and some of the elements in here as well. And they felt seen. They're like, I work until 6, and I'm told I'm a workaholic. I'm this, I'm that. I'm lazy. I procrastinate. I'm like, no, you're just listening to your. And so, really, what I love about the work you've done in here, and we're going to get to again the how to do it well, the boundaries, and those kind
Mhm.
of things, is you offer some templates, you offer some framings, you offer some tactics, but with the complete understanding, especially, and you set that tone right out of the gate, of your version of productive is going to be different than that person's and that
Mhm.
person's and that person's and that person's. So you can't, it's like, me listening to a writing podcast and listening to how Brandon Sanderson writes versus Stephen King versus Matt Haig. If I'm trying to find the perfect formula of how to write, I'm not going to get it from those three different models. You're going to have to figure out your own. When someone goes through this book, what are some of the things that you feel the personal touches that people might miss because of the way that the world like we're always in a hurry, we're always in a rush, we're always kind of moving things forward. Those little bits that if we don't apply them or don't catch them, then some of the framing that you've offered falls apart. Like, do you have any of those that you've recognized? And if you do, what are some of the things they can do to remedy that?
Yeah, I think definitely the power hours piece. If you were going to interview 100 executives and say, what is the one small change that you made that made the biggest difference? And I talk about doesn't have to be radical. If you realize that you're a morning person and you happen to have meetings every day from 8 to 10, don't stress about that. Find out, can I clear one morning? One morning from 8 to 10 can still make a huge difference in you feeling on top of it versus waiting till 8 to 10 p.m. and doing that work. And so I think that one small shift can really make a massive difference in how you're getting those things done. And then we talked about the where piece, and that's not just hybrid versus home, work from home versus in the office. It's really thinking about where you do your certain types of work. So you mentioned
Right.
those writers. One of the big things that I've read about writers is this concept of state dependency, where your brain associates what you're working on with where you are. So I talk about a study where scuba divers split in half on water, half on land, big groups. They were given a string of numbers and letters to memorize. Then they switched half of those groups. So now half the group switched and half stayed the same. And the people who were still in the same location where they learned the string, a rate of recall was statistically significant higher
Hmm.
than the people who switched. And that's because they were underwater. They were thinking about this string. Now they're still underwater thinking about it. So if you listen to authors, yes, they're writing at different times a day. A lot of them say, I wrote in the same seat of the coffee shop for this entire book. I sat down, I smelled the coffee, I thought of these characters, and so that's another nuance where it's not always just about, am I at home in the office? Do I go here? Do I go here? It's being consistent and having those rhythms that can also help. So and when I'm in my peak productivity time, then I go to this place to do this activity and I eliminate distractions and have the right tools. And, that's where the magic happens.
Well, and I think so. For example, I have, and you can't see it from here, but up on my desk, which I have an uplift desk. It's a very wide one, and half of it is tech, and half of it is writing. So I actually have a space with
There you
my
go.
hemming right, and that's where. But what's interesting about it too is it's not just a space. I have a very specific device that I worked on my book with, as opposed
Hmm.
to, I mean, I have capture devices. I mean, anyone who knows, I mean, we have to, I think, if we're preaching this stuff like notes, notebooks, and pockets, all that fun stuff. Are you a fountain pen collector, by the way, Laura? Because I'm sure you probably have your nice fancy notebooks and all that stuff too. But I mean, the point
I
is,
do, yes.
but the point is, what it's that's boundaries though. And when you talk
Mhm.
about boundaries in the book, one of the things that I find fascinating is the way people, and Cal and I have talked about this before, the idea of if you have a scheduling link, like which we did for the like this actually is an anomaly. This actually is a good example. So I have a scheduling link when people want to book podcasts or
Mhm.
generally want to book chats or whatever. I'm sure you do to a degree as well, right? But so that's the default. That's the hey, this is what you use. But in this instance, and this is why you have the rules so you can make exceptions, you weren't available during those times. And also, we wanted to get this done before the summer season really kicked in. So we eschewed that link and just did back and forth, which was minimal comparatively to what it would be if I was doing it with every
Mhm.
single person. Now, I think this also, so when Cal and I talked about this, like, well, why would you have a booking link? That's not what he said, but the point is that a lot of people have have had hesitance to add that because, like, well, who am I to have a booking link? Why can't we just do the back and forth? I don't want them to feel like I'm like, and Cal says this. I've said that the idea is what you're doing is you're not you're this is to the whole negative and positive framing of boundaries. You're not saying I'm not available. Don't think about it as this is the link telling you when I'm not available. Think of this as, hey, I'm giving you full reign over all of my availability that I've set aside in this particular parameter, AKA podcast in this example, no one on the other side of that conversation is typically thinking, wow, look at the, oh my goodness, they're thinking, wow, you gave me all this time. That's amazing, right?
Right.
No one's,
Exactly.
so if we can start thinking, and you have a list in the boundaries chapter about like, again, meetings. I don't take meetings on Fridays. That's a bad way to, because that's the negative, so how do we change that language? Because that I think just doing that unlocks so
Mhm.
much.
Yes, you're right. Nobody looks at your booking link and thinks, wow, look at all the times he doesn't have listed here. And so you really are only focused on what you can do. And I talk about that even being a parent. My kids don't do screen time during the week. They don't even know that. They say, we do movies every Friday. That's
Yep.
the only thing they're focused on because I've never said the other sentence. And so I think just, reframing when you set boundaries, and that actually makes it a lot easier for people who feel uncomfortable setting boundaries because they feel like they're not quote setting it, they're
Yeah.
not creating that barrier. Instead, they're talking about everything they do. I'm available for coffee chats 8 to 10, and so you can even go one step further and have a different link, which is what I do for different types
Yep.
of
Me too.
activities. I only do my coffee chats in the afternoon because that's when I'm low energy. So if you want to do that, here's this link. If you want to, that. And so I think that, that's when people ask me, how do I say no? How do I both protect my time and maintain that friendliness and that, having approachability with my team? I always talk about that. And even if it's, you're a new manager or you're an executive, you can send that email with all the positive boundaries that you have. And it could be, you might want to leave every day at 5 to pick up your kids. And you might not say I leave at 5. You say I'm available until 4:30. And then if we need anything, I'm still available from 8 to 9. Later that now the focus is not even around that block where you're unavailable. And so I found that to be very helpful as a recovering say yeser. An easier way to say no is to have that preset positive boundary and then to point to that when it comes down to it.
When I chatted with Gretchen Rubin about the four tendencies a number of years ago, we found out that I was an obliger who was using upholder tactics to present as an upholder. And this would be an example because I'm like
Yeah.
you. I'm like, sure, I'll meet, blah, blah, blah. And you know when I'll meet? And this is what we set boundaries because, and I love the quote in here, boundaries are nothing if not advertised widely, right? And they don't have to be overt. Like most advertisement is very subtle.
Yeah.
You're like, what was that an ad for again? Oh, it was for, a car. Oh, I didn't. Oh, right. They were driving a car. That's why. Like, it's very, but I like the idea of if you don't respect your own boundaries, you can't expect anybody else to. And so,
Mhm.
yes, having exceptions are there, making sure that those are exceptions are important, I think. But to your point, the idea of, I think what happens with boundaries, if you like, so for example, if I didn't have that, uh, I would easily go take the coffee during my writing time instead of doing the
Mhm.
writing because the coffee is
Yeah.
easy and the writing is
Right.
hard, right?
Mhm.
Um, all right, before we wrap up, there's a couple more things I want to get to. Number one, and this is just a personal curiosity because first off, I know that Google has Google Tasks. I know that but
Mhm.
what do you use? Because project management, I mean, this is just Google doesn't really have a project management software as part of their suite. I've always been curious as to two of the major tech companies do not either own or have purchased an existing to-do list app. I mean, Microsoft has obviously with to do, but Apple and Google have kind of stayed clear of that. And I wonder, first off, what are you using? Are you a
Mhm.
hybrid person? Are you like, cause I am, I'm very much a like, get it on paper to capture it maybe, or digital. But then when I'm trying to do that, again, the list funnel, some of it gets back to paper so I can just see that stuff. And others stay in the long-term digital tool, which is ClickUp for professional and Todoist for personal as of this recording. So are you a hybrid? Are you somebody that like, what do you use? Or are you allowed to
Yeah.
say?
Oh, yeah, I'm allowed to say. I mean, I work with these product teams and talk about some of these features that I love in that I use or that I wish they had. And
Yep.
there's been a lot of changes to tasks over the years and calendar and focus time. And a lot of those are conversations that I've had with the teams. I think I'm definitely a hybrid person. So I use Google Keep for all of my captures. So, I mean, probably 15 to 20 times a day. I'm not going to say, hey, GOOGLE, because I have one in my room. But when I
Yep.
say that, add my hands covered in eggs, add eggs to the grocery list, add email John to the capture list, add, driving in the car. So having that way of virtually, I'm in the shower, I can
Yep.
still say, at all those places I think of the idea, there's a Google Nest home device or phone or a Google Assistant
Yep.
to capture all of those. So the capture list for me is in Google Keep. And then I do use tasks a lot of time to pull out actions from emails. So when you're in an email, you can translate it in Gmail to
Yep.
tasks and then put a note, so I don't have to reopen the email. So that's kind of like my email capture. But then I am a physical paper person when it comes to how do I organize that all. I truly still like planners.
Yeah.
So I use the Google tools, virtually, and same with chat. Somebody chats me an action item, I can forward it to my inbox or add it to tasks. And then when it comes time, there's something so satisfying about, there you go, getting out my colored markers and like really diving deep. And then I always take a picture because I did one time lose my main list and I felt like my life was over. So now anytime I rewrite that, I just take a quick photo. But I'm definitely a mix. But I don't think these days you can have a capture list that you write. I mean, you can, but it's like all these places when you're driving and you're in the shower,
I
how are you
think
getting those ideas?
I think you can when you're with someone. So, for example, and I can tell you this from personal experience because my wife hates it when I dictate, when I do any vocal stuff like that.
Mhm,
Because I'm the same, only I use Apple products. So
mhm.
I have a reminders list in reminders that's for writing ideas, and then everything else is just like a capture list. So I'll go, hey, add this idea to the writing list, and it does, right? Like, I mean,
Mhm.
and I have SIRI because she I was gonna
Yeah,
say she
she's listening.
they are in here. I don't know. Um, the device is active and it would interrupt the interview. But I think that when you're with, like, so for example, when I'm with my kids, it's good to have a notebook. Like I have what I call like, so actually, just to give you a sense, like I have these little. Normally they're Bear and Fig
Mm,
notebooks. This is from Monk Manual, but I have one of these in like every jacket, along with like a pen. So that way, and right now since it's summer, I have cargo. Yes, I commit the cardinal sin of wearing cargo shorts. I'm almost 50. I can get away. I don't care anymore. I'll wear ankle socks. I don't care what my daughter says. But I have those with me because then if I'm with they know it's optics, right? Like I can write it down, but if I'm with someone or with my kids, and this is going back when they were younger too, they know that I'm not checking my phone,
right.
checking anything like that. I'm whatever has come to mind is going in that notebook. Or if it's something someone said, I'm making a note of it because then they have my attention. My attention is still there. Then what I do is
Okay, I was gonna say, so
I
every
bring this
time
notebook
in your
home.
notebook,
So I have
how do
so
you consolidate the notebook?
so here's what I do. I don't have to remember what I wrote down in the notebook. I just have to remember what I wrote. That I did write something in it,
That you did.
right?
Mhm.
Then I drop it into a physical inbox that I have in my study. So if I've written something, I'll remember, did I write something
Oh,
down? Yes,
okay,
I did.
okay,
And then I transfer it. And I have,
okay.
again, I've talked about this. I have this thing called the strike through system, which is like, if I've done it already,
Mhm,
I just put a line through it. If I move it to
mhm,
my master planner, whether if it's something I'm going to do this week, it'll probably go into this physical notebook. If it's something I'm going to
mhm,
do down the line, it'll go digital. And then I'll put a
mhm,
line with an arrow through it. If I decide that it was something stupid and I'm not going to do anything with it because I am a relentless capturer, I will just do a squiggly
mhm,
line through it. And if it doesn't have any one of those three lines in it, and I'm looking, because sometimes I'll miss something, I'm like, oh crap, this doesn't have a line through it. What I
mhm.
know I didn't do anything with it. So that's the
Okay,
process, right?
I
So
like that.
it literally is just because the problem is we try to remember the things, and this is what my concern is with a lot of the and this is not a new problem. Keep this in mind because David Allen talked about this, like gather your
Mhm.
inboxes. We still have a lot of them. And in fact,
Yes,
we have more that we're like inboxes could be your direct messages on social media. Inboxes could be Slack. Inboxes could be email.
check.
Inboxes could be Keep. Like there's so
Yes.
many different
Yep.
things. So you have
Mhm.
to have a way to go, okay, and maybe that's a once a day thing. Maybe but
Right.
once you decide what that needs to be, then you can get away. Like that notebook thing took me a while. to get it dialed
Mhm.
in. And then I realized what if I forgot my notebook? Well, at least I have my phone, but I don't want to forget my notebook again. And you've talked about this before, like in your book, you're like, refine the system. If the system breaks,
Mhm.
notice, do an after action thing and figure out so that's what I do. So I have a multitude of notebooks that and it doesn't have to be an expensive notebook either. It could be like a little
Yeah.
tiny, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be I like
Right.
my fancy pens. I like my fancy notebooks, and that's okay. Um, so yeah, I was just curious because I think that, and the good thing about Task is because Task has contextual filters that you can apply to them, right? You can add
Mhm.
categories and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So as long as you get
Mhm.
creative with that, how important is it
Yeah.
for people to think outside the box with this stuff, which I just gave an example of, like thinking outside the
Yeah.
box with your practices? How how im- do you think that, like, and I know from reading the book that there are ways to do that. There's inventive and
Yeah.
innovative ways to personalize all of these things. It's just by its very nature. But how do you how do you encourage people to break free of that? This goes back, I guess, to my original question, my original topic of, hey, this is how this person writes, so I should write this way, or this is how
Mhm.
Ali Abdallah is productive, or this is how Cal Newport is productive. And, but you're not taking into account that Cal has this job and he has these many kids, and so like you're not taking
Mhm.
all that into account. So how do you help someone when they're going through the process of the book? And there are lots of, I mean, we only scratch the surface, really. I highly recommend that you pick up Uptime. How do you help somebody and help them figure out that, hey, look, like you need to think outside the box with some of this stuff, and here's how you could probably do that with this very specific example, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I actually love that you said that because I never, I tell people my system is just a starting point. I like when people say, hey, I did this and it didn't work for me. So I went little notebooks, because that's interesting to me. It's the same. You're still hitting those 5 C's in the way that you are going to stick with. And that's the most important. And so sometimes I think people are looking for like the perfect tool, the perfect software, the perfect, all these things. Like I just bought a new X because it's going to solve my life. And I think that the more important thing is just doing something and then being like, you know what? I actually feel like maybe I'm losing all my little notebooks. I started with that one and now I feel like I actually do need some sort of digital way of doing this. So now you make that little adjustment. And so I think that having somewhere to start, realize what's working and what's not working, which is why I check back in with anyone that I've coached and then iterate from there is the most important thing. And personalizing it for something that you're excited to do. If you don't like writing things down and you would rather do it digitally, do with what is going to be easiest for your brain to keep up with. And when I think at the end of the book, I talk about, no person in the world is going to get something out of every single chapter, but every single person is going to get something out of a couple chapters. So any of the chapters that, put the book down a day later, what are you still thinking about? Which chapter did you highlight the most? That's what you need the next push on. And that's why I deduced it into the productivity practices to say, hey, here are the things that you can do right now on this topic of too many meetings, email, whatever it is, and just start there. And small changes, like I said, 1 power hour blocked a week, that one small change can feel really big at the end of the day. And so not getting caught up in everything has to be the way I do it or everything has to be perfect.
Laura, this has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for taking the time today. The book is called Uptime, A Practical Guide to Personal Productivity and Wellbeing. Laura, where can people pick up the book and where can they keep up with the work that you're doing?
The book is anywhere books are sold, and you can find me on YouTube and LinkedIn and lauramaemartin.com.
Thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thank you.
Thanks to Laura for joining me on the program. You can find all of the relevant links and show notes and everything related to this episode at productivityist.com/podcast 532. And you can also check out the show notes wherever you're getting your podcast. Wherever you get your podcasts is also where you should subscribe to this podcast. That way you don't miss a single episode of what's to come. And you can also check back in the archives and see any of the episodes that we've done over the past 500 plus episodes that resonate with you. Another thing you can do to support the show is to check out the sponsors that you heard during today's podcast. just go to productivityist.com/podcast sponsors to see a bevy of sponsors there, and also click on the links. That way they know that we sent you. So there you have it. That's this edition of A Productive Conversation. Another episode is in the books. It's time for you to go about your day. I will see you next time. Until then, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.